Hi, everyone. It's Marcy here, and today I have Valonda Banks from PA. Hi, Valonda. How are you?
Good, Marcy. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to do that. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about your business. What you do?
Yes. So, um, my husband and I co-own and operate Liberty Employment Solutions, and we exist to help small and medium-sized businesses with their people strategy. So, we help them attract, identify, and retain talent by working on employer branding strategy, what they look like to the job market, a strategy to identify the people with the right skill set, behavior, and experience for the role. And then we help them with the onboarding and organizational development type strategy to keep them.
So, Valonda and I already sort of started this conversation offline, which was good because we're going to bring it right there. So, as we were chit-chatting, we're talking about, besides, the economy and inflation, the
Yeah.
probably next biggest issue, I'll say call it an issue, for business is hiring quality employees. Would you say that that's correct? Like that's pretty much what you kind of hear out there these days. And I was saying, as an old school person, I don't look that way, but I am older. I'm of the generation that we took a job, we went to work, we did what our bosses told us, then we went home. That was sort of how it was, right? But there's a shift in that, right? And I'm not saying that it's bad or good. I'm just putting out here. Certainly
Yeah.
is a shift now, is more of a employee driven marketplace. But as we were saying, the problem with that is that it's still a basic function of you have a job, here are the requirements, here's what has to happen. And I said, is it generational? Is there something else going on? Valonda gave me a great answer. So I'm going to cue you, tell everyone on the call what you said to me.
Yeah. Well, I think the employer-driven market was never healthy to begin with. It just became the way we do things. And a wholly employee-driven job market is not healthy. I think a really good way to look at the whole idea of employees, or if you're sitting on the employee side of the table, employers, is what is the mission of the organization? How is that mission supposed to be executed? Do you want to join us? If you're sitting on the employer side of the table, do you want to join us on this mission? Do we work this way? How can we, now here's the employee side, how can we make this fulfilling for you? Are you wired to do this and be fulfilled? And if so, and if, say, Marcy shows up and has the right skills and experience and she thinks right about the job, which means she will behave in a way that's consistent with how we want our product or service delivered to our customers, then how can I keep, as an employer, how can I keep Marcy in that good lane where the work is bringing her energy and life and in a way that makes sense for her family? My husband and I, when we designed Liberty, we said we want this to be a place where people actually want to come to work, like the place that we wish we could have worked growing up in the job market. And so we said, what would that look like? And the first thing we both came to the realization of is that what we didn't have was somebody that recognized we had a life outside of work. And because for so many years that's been ignored, we find employees coming to the table talking about how parts of the job aren't good for their mental health. They talk about, like, I had somebody come and ask for more money, yet they weren't showing up to work on time consistently over a long period of time. Like, so there's this, like, employers have ignored that. And so now employees are demanding that come to the table. And so can you say, this is what the role requires? Can you meet the requirements of the role, even if you are a good fit, which means, I'll just use Liberty as an example. Our phone lines are open 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday. You don't have to do nights, you don't have to do weekends, but can you make that schedule work? Because even if, Marcy, you're the greatest fit ever, if you can't do the work during the hours that we have, that's not a fit. And so I think, like, one side of the table was ignored for so long that now they're like, you will not ignore this anymore. And yet it still has to be done in a way that makes sense. And for me, this came out when I started. I worked in for an insurance company based out of Chicago that had a subsidiary in my hometown. And I went to work. I did a good job. I got promoted out of my boss's department And yet I had to stay in that department. So I had two bosses. And so I was traveling and doing work for the parent company, but I was still expected Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, to do X amount of work for this boss in this department. And at one point, I said, I was a single mom. I had a son who was traveling all over the country playing soccer. I was traveling for work. So I have two travel schedules as a single mom, plus work, plus school. And I was doing an cutover of a phone system on the weekend. And I said, I got home at 11:30 at night. I decided Monday morning I wasn't going to work at 7:30. I was taking my son out for breakfast because I hadn't seen him. And I got called into my boss's office because I said, I've been away all weekend, be in at noon. And she said, I really think you need to consider if this job is for you. And I said, interesting you said that. Because when I saw your email about the fact you didn't like that I came in late, I actually got the newspaper. This was way back in the early 2000s. And I started looking for another position because I'm not sure either. I will not volunteer time to this company. I will volunteer for, say, an adoption agency because she had asked me to fill out a reference for her to work at an adoption agency. And I just said, I'm not, if I'm going to donate time, I'm going to do it to an organization I care about, not this business. And it was one of those times where I, as the employee, I wasn't making demands on her, but I was saying, your expectations are unrealistic, that I'm here for 40 hours during the week. And then I'm also traveling. And then you're expecting 60 to 70 on a salary that says maybe 50. So that but I feel like that today's job market's throwing a tantrum in a different way. Like, that was me drawing boundaries. And I think that's what they're doing. And they didn't know how to do it before. And so they're doing it in weird ways that conflict with the agreement that they have, that they made. We recently talked to our Liberty employees and we said, how do you feel about work-life balance? Like, scale of 1 to 10. 1, it's terrible. I'm walking out the door after this conversation. And 10, I feel like you respect the boundary of my schedule and to a human, all of them said 10. Then I asked, first we had this conversation separately. Then I said, how do you feel about your level of commitment to what you've agreed to do for Liberty? And all of them said 3 to 4 points less. In one case, somebody said about half. And I was like, see, it's so interesting. When I treat you like an adult, Marcy, like I hired an adult, I don't expect that I have to treat you like a kid. I'm not going to do that. I respect you too much to do that. But when you commit to this, and you don't hold up to it, we have to have a conversation. And so I just think, I remember that same boss who told me to really think about whether this job was for me used to walk through the department and say, I feel like I'm in an adult daycare. Like, she wasn't treating her employees as grown-ups doing a job. And so I think when we do that, it's the simple conversation. So I've said a lot of things essentially to say, we just need to really see the people that walk through our doors that we want to hire as people. As much as they may love working for you, they may like you, they may believe in the product or service that you sell, they're still there for a paycheck. Like, that paycheck is funding something. And so just to circle back, when my husband and I walked through the front door of the office, the first day we actually had an office and employees, we literally said, we're going to recognize that this paycheck is funding something. For one person on our team, it's funding their ability to live in a city that they've always dreamed about, and they're getting ready to move to a new one. And they're funding several pets that they have, a bearded dragon, a cat. Notice I know all these things about that human. Another one, husband has a great job. She even side gigs, but this is fulfilling something different and allowing her to make a difference. She wouldn't have to be here financially, but I know that she wants to make a difference. So actually, before I got on this call, I thanked her for the difference that she made in just making my work life more reasonable over the last couple of weeks. So just knowing who your people are and why they're there, it's for the paycheck, but that paycheck is funding something else.
That all makes sense. And I'm going to go back quickly to one thing from the beginning about, company culture, right? And I think that was a conversation I had with someone else earlier in the week. We talked about knowing what your company culture is, knowing what your mission statement is, because you can't expect an employee to come in, and if you don't give them those types of specifics, right, beyond just, you have to have good oral communication, you have to have good writing skills, you have to be on time, right? Those are pretty important things to most jobs out there, right? But if you're not giving them really good articulate descriptions of what the job
Yep.
is so that they can really decide, right? Make an informed decision. Because if you come in and say, hey, you gotta be a great team player, and they're like, I'm a great team player, this will be great. And then they come in and all of a sudden you're like, oh, and by the way, you're also going to work independently half your time in a cubicle. That's difficult, right? So I want to touch on that for a minute because I think sometimes as employers, especially from old school employers, there's still that mindset of, well, it's a job. You're going to do, the job is going to, you're going to do whatever the job tells you to do. But sometimes we're not clear in our expectations, right? Or very specific in the requirements. And I think that causes a little bit of problems when hiring. Would you agree with that?
Oh my word, yes. I mean, so I would say, like, let's talk about the clarity first. Um, you have to know who you are as an organization. And I agree on the mission, vision, values. I don't agree on doing them as a checklist item. What you need to do is step back and say, who has upheld, like, who is my best employee, even if they don't work for you now, and why? And who were my worst employees? Our values, we started out with two. One is authenticity, because my husband, who is the funniest human being I have ever met, is also his own, he is his own person. He works for a financial company, but if you saw him, you would think he was an entry level office worker because he just doesn't care. I want him to care more than he does, but he doesn't. And people value that. So authenticity for us was one of the values because it came out of who he was. Relational service was our second value. It came out of who I am. I can only serve you, Marcy, to the degree that I know who you are, but that's me. So those were two values. All the rest of them came from bumping into employees that we thought carried similar values. We didn't even know how to articulate. And out of that came all the rest. And so now we have five. You could ask anybody on my team what they are. They can tell you because we talk about them all the time. We talk about which ones we find are more natural for us, which are more challenging. When they start with us, their first or second day, they sit down with either Jeremy and I, and we tell stories about how the values came to be, like the ownership value. We had an employee who was 21, 22, and we had one who was in his mid 40s and had as much life experience or as much work experience as Janice had as in age. Like he had been in the job market and had done the work. She ran circles around him. She outthought him. And out of that came an ownership and problem solving value that we all had shared, but hadn't bumped into yet. So when you come to Liberty and you start to work, you hear a story for every value. So it's very clear. For instance, when we talk about ownership, we had somebody who went on vacation and didn't take care of any of their work. And so all of a sudden on Monday, everybody's asking, where's this? Where's that? Did this person have you take care of that? And nobody had. And we're like, okay, so that doesn't work here. We give you vacation. We trust that if you need a day, if you need a mental health day, we trust that you have taken care of the responsibilities to say, I really need you to handle this, or this can sit till I get back. And let me tell the client that I'm not going to be in tomorrow. Like it's that whole idea of let's be grown-ups at the table. You don't come in the door and work a job here and just get to take off and not think about what it is that you carry here. Just like I'm not going to ask you to take your laptop on vacation, Marcy. If you're taking a vacation, I'm going to respect that boundary. But if you're doing something different than what you agreed to Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5, then you better care for it before you jet.
So that's a good point. I'm going to switch to the employee side for a minute because I think sometimes too, uh, an individual might be so desperate for a job, right, or ready for a change that they jump in to a position thinking, well, maybe it really won't be like that, right? Or maybe this isn't, it's something that I need to do now here in the short term. Or, yeah, they said that I need to be independent, but, right, like you get all these buts sometimes, right, on the employee side of things. So what would you say to an employee out there who's like, yeah, I get it, you really need a job, but on my side, like these are the things that you have to be cautious of when taking a job that you think that maybe you're not a right fit for, right? Because we see that happen as well. Maybe as an employer, I think you're a great fit, but as an employee, I know in my mind it's probably not the best fit, but I just really need a job. So here I am.
Yeah, so I put that back on the employer.
Okay.
Like there's a way that you can screen people to identify whether they're BSing you or not. Like if you are, our philosophy at Liberty is you take people through the process to learn as much about them as possible and less about their skills and experience and more about how they think. Like for us, there's two things that we don't rush the process, even if we desperately feel like we need someone, because I know that if I hate using you as an example for this one, but let's say I hire you, Marcy, and you're not a good fit. Now, Janice, I'll say, has taken all this time to train you, and now you can't carry it. So she's having to double check you all the time. And she's got the stress of, is this going to work out? And what did she just say to that client? And. So in my mind, rather than having not you, but a poor employee come in and not execute well, let's extend the process. Yes, does that cause Janice pain because she doesn't have help? Yes, but Janice also understands no help is better than bad help. So there are two non-negotiables that we look for our business, and we encourage our clients to. And one is self-awareness, and two is coachability. And so we have a step-by-step process, and they come in, and the last step, and now we have an office. We will redesign this for clients who don't have offices, but the last step is they come in and they sit side by side and they watch work happen. And then they're in a round table where they get to talk to other employees, and they get to ask them, they talk about what they like and what they find challenging about working with us. And I'm not in that. So to create more authenticity, like the boss lady isn't listening, and then they get to me. And by then, they've seen enough that they either want it or they don't. And if they don't necessarily do a good job of interviewing. If they do, now they've spent enough time, broken the ice, that they're being more authentic. And so I am constantly challenging things in that conversation to really identify how they think. Because if they just need a job, first of all, they never last through the process, because that's step 4, by the way. If they really need a job, that's why a step-by-step, well-designed process makes sense. Because if somebody just wants a job, they're not going to go through that process. But even if they do, when they get to the last interview and they're being challenged on how they think about things, they're either going to get frustrated, or the answers that they give are going to be like, yeah, this isn't great. So again, I say that's more on the design, like that's more on the employer side. Like, did you design the process that authentically showed them who you are and what you need, or did you hire a warm body?
Yeah. Well, what I love about what you just said is because I just had a friend go through a process. She was actually at the end of the interview process, loved everything about it, was super excited, and had the opportunity to talk to an employee at that company and said to me, I would have taken that job had I not talked to that employee, not because they didn't give that company rave reviews and not because they didn't love it, because I still love the company and the culture. I just realized what they did every single day, I would not be happy doing.
Yeah.
And that was such an interesting concept to me because I don't remember ever, prior to my being an entrepreneur, ever being able to talk to an employee at the company I was interviewing for. And I thought, this is a really great out of the box idea, right? Talking about being authentic. Here, talk to someone who works here, right?
Yeah.
See what they have to say. And she walked away, like I said, feeling like, I think the company is great. I think the culture is amazing, but that specific job wasn't for me. And that, I think, actually lended more credibility to that
Yeah.
company, right? They were super open, they were very aware. And so
Yeah.
when you just said that right now, that hit home for me, because I don't know that a lot of businesses do that or allow that or want to do that. And I think from an employee perspective, amazing. And from an employer's perspective, again, how incredible that you've now saved yourself the opportunity, right, of hiring someone who in a month or two, like you said, you spend all this time and energy training. Training is not cheap, right?
Yeah.
You've got to pay an employee and all of the things. And so you've avoided that now. Do you think that that's something that companies are starting to do more and more? Because they didn't do it back in my day. So maybe it's
Yeah.
different now. Is it like a new concept? Do you feel like are companies feeling more open to this conversation? Or is it something that you guys specifically say out there and it's one of those things that's sort of, not as vocal in the HR world kind of sphere?
Feel like people either want to hold to the way they've always done it, or they want to be Google and ask weird questions that don't have anything to do with the job. Like I was talking to another I was on another podcast, and somebody asked me like, what's the new trend in hiring? And I'm like, I hate that question. Like, I don't like the question because it's not about new trends. Hiring should always be about getting to know the human across the table. And whether you're an employer or employer, this is the same. Who's the human across the table? What do they do? How do they do it? And do we do it similarly enough that we want to do it together? It should always be that way. And so if there's any new trend, it should be a better way of assessing that. I honestly, um, part of our mantra is really to upset the whole recruiting world. It's very transactional. So I can get a little edgy about this part. I don't really care about the trend. Every client that we talked to, I was just in a physical therapist office in Philly, and I said, in addition to them manipulating your elbow or your arm so you can see what it's like and experience them, they should shadow a therapist. And you should watch how they interact with the therapist and with the patient. Do they awkwardly insert themselves? Do they watch and say, I don't know if I do it that way? You don't want somebody like that talking in front of a patient. Let the patient know ahead of time this is going to happen, but like genuinely, like let them work with a therapist, and that therapist should be trained to understand what's happening and to report back. You know what? They asked really good questions. They did it so politely. They said, hey, Jim, can I ask you a quick question? I noticed that you did this on the elbow. Tell me more about that. Like, yes, like this person wants to understand how the organization thinks about the task that is to be done. For home service businesses, we'll like where you're hopping in a truck with a team and you're driving and working on a roof or in somebody's bathroom, especially if you're going to be in the house. I had a customer our client who we're like, you really should do a truck and chat. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, put the human in the truck with you and go to a customer's house. Really? I'm like, yeah. So he had somebody that had been great throughout the interview process. They were going to, I think it was like a plumbing issue. And he put the guy in the truck, and all the guy did was talk about like very inappropriate things. And he was like, I would never want this guy in the truck with any of my guys. And I'm the owner. If he talks this way in front of me, and I'm like, that had nothing to do with his skills and abilities, but it had to do with a critical job function of riding with the team. If he had not put him in the truck, he would have hired him. And then when he did get him in front of a customer, he inserted himself awkwardly and he's like, nope, nope, I'm so glad we did that. So there's a way, again, if your philosophy is, how can I design this to teach the employee as much about us as possible? Thus, your friends like, I love the company, but I don't want to do that. And it's designed to teach you as much about the applicant as possible. Like you can't lose by doing that. Now I'll have people say, what about intellectual property? Or yeah, you get them to sign off on a non-disclosure or a confidentiality agreement, but you just limit their access, but not limit the access to the culture and the behaviors and enough of the work that they get a sense that they want to do it. I'd be so curious in the instance of your friend, if a position opened that was more along the lines of what she wanted to do and she reapplied and they liked her and she liked them, that would be a fast close. So like I love that. I love that they did that, and I love the result for her that happened to us with a human that saw how we did phone interviews and was like, I love what you do. I love how you do it. I don't want to do that. And I'm like, well, that's the job. And so that was a no-go. And it was a friend of mine. We're still friends today. So yeah, that's great.
I think she definitely would take a job if it was more in line with what she was thinking down the
Yeah.
road. Like I said, she still had a very positive overall opinion of that company, which I
Yeah.
think is critical.
Yes.
All right, so no trend here. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what should have always been and should always be going forward, right? Putting that person into that position. If you had one overall tip for someone out there who's hiring, who maybe hasn't had great success in the past, what would you tell them?
I would say identify someone, create your process to teach you as much about them, especially from the authenticity standpoint and the coachability standpoint. I'm sorry, not authenticity, coachability and self-awareness. Do we have time for one crazy story?
Yes, we love crazy
Okay.
stories.
Okay. So I had a client who was hiring an HR position, and it was a small business, 100 employees, but they all worked outside of the central office. So the central office only had about 6 or 7, and the only time he could interview this person was at night. And so knowing he was male and he was interviewing a female and it was after hours, I was like, can I come sit in with you? And my goal was just to create just to protect him, honestly, from anything dumb. So I go to the interview and I'm sitting there, and he really wanted somebody who cared about people. And so he asked the question, like, and what came out was, I do this way because I really care about people. And I saw him take his little check mark and be like, oh, okay. And then she said something else and she's like, because I really care about people. And he's like, yeah. And he's checking this off. And I'm like, this is not good. The third or fourth time she said it, I was like, okay, I can't sit back anymore. And I said, may I ask a question? And he's like, please. And I said, Tammy, can you tell me about a time that you cared about people so much and it kind of got in the way? And without hesitation, Marcy, she's like, yes. We had an employee who was struggling, and I invited her to live with our family. And my husband was a little surprised when I called him and told him she was coming home with me. And all of a sudden, I'm like, this woman has no self-awareness. Number one, she's talking about it in the interview. And number two, she didn't even think to check with her husband first. She could have done all the paperwork perfectly. She could have cared genuinely. I believe that she did, about all the people she would serve for him, but she would have no personal boundaries. And so, like, self-awareness is so important, especially if this person is going to be in front of clients or working with critical people on your team. And then also the ability to be coachable. Like, when how I want it done is different than you want to do it, and I need you to do it my way. Are you going to be able to be coached to do it that way, or are you going to be like my way or the highway? And so those two things, if you don't do anything else, identify a really effective way to measure how self-aware someone is and how coachable they are.
That's great information. I love when someone else tells a crazy story and it's not my crazy story to share. So I appreciate that you did that. And honestly, it was great information. I got a lot from this, and I appreciate how authentic you've been here and how you've conveyed that in your business. For everyone who's been out here, I appreciate your listening in. Valonda will certainly be out there on social media. We'll give you all her contact information in case you have questions about your hiring process. Well, Valonda, thank you again so much for spending some time with us today.
Yes, thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about work and people. It's one of our favorites.
All right, everyone, we'll see you later.